Economic collapse. You hear the term often. You may even be preparing for it. But do you know what it really means? The term has been used to describe a broad range of bad economic situations, from severe prolonged depression with high bankruptcy rates and high unemployment, such as the Great Depression, to a breakdown in normal commerce caused by hyperinflation, or even an economically caused sharp increase in the death rate. It's often accompanied by social chaos, civil unrest, and sometimes even a breakdown of law and order. Past economic collapses have had political as well as financial causes. Persistent trade deficits, wars, revolutions, famines, and depletion of important resources. Incompetent governments are another cause, especially when they go bankrupt and resort to money printing, causing hyperinflation.
The United States may be setting itself up for hyperinflation in the near future. The Treasury and Federal Reserve have frivolously pumped hundreds of billions of dollars into the economy. That total will likely reach several trillion dollars within 1 year, with more increases in years to come. This is precisely the situation which developed in economies experiencing hyperinflation in the past. Germany in the interwar period was crippled by inflation. Many Latin American economies were destroyed by inflation in the past several decades, and Zimbabwe, once a strong and independent African economy, experienced the worst hyperinflation in recent history. Investor Mark Faber, speaking to Bloomberg News, fully expects something like this to happen in the United States. Faber said that he was 100% certain that the U.S. would experience hyperinflation, as the dollar is devalued to the point of collapse and prices on all goods rise beyond control.
There are several examples of economic collapse through history. The Taiping Rebellion, followed by internal warfare, famines, and epidemics, caused the deaths of over 100 million and greatly reduced the Chinese economy. The Great Depression of the 1930s. While it's argued that the Great Depression was not a true economic collapse, the decade of the 1930s witnessed the most severe worldwide economic contraction since the start of the Industrial Revolution. In the U.S., the Depression began in the summer of 1929, soon followed by the stock market crash of October 1929. American stock prices continued to decline until they finally hit bottom in July of 1932. In the first quarter of 1933, the banking system broke down, asset prices had collapsed, bank lending had largely ceased, a quarter of the American workforce was unemployed, and real GDP per capita in 1933 was 29% below its 1929 value. The ensuing rapid recovery was interrupted by a major recession in 1937-38. The U.S. finally recovered in 1941, the eve of its entry into World War II, which gave rise to a boom almost as dramatic as the depression that preceded it. While there were numerous bank failures during the Great Depression, most banks in developed countries survived, as did most currencies and governments. The most significant monetary change during the Depression was the demise of the gold standard by most nations that were on it. In the U.S., the dollar was redeemable in gold until 1933, when U.S. citizens were forced to turn over their gold for fiat currency and were forbidden to own monetary gold for the next 4 decades. Subsequently, gold was revalued from just over $20 per ounce to $35 per ounce. Gold ownership was legalized in the U.S. in 1974, but not with legal tender status. As bad as the Great Depression was, it took place during a period of high productivity growth, which caused real wages to rise. The high unemployment was partly a result of the productivity gains, allowing the number of hours of standard work week to be cut, while restoring economic output to previous levels after a few years. Workers who remained employed saw their real hourly earnings rise because wages remained constant while prices fell. However, overall earnings remained relatively constant because of the reduced work week. Converting the dollar to a fiat currency and devaluing gold ensured the end of deflation and created inflation, which made the high debt accumulated during the 1920s boom easier to repay, although some of the debt was written off. Economic collapse of Soviet communism. During the 1980s, the Eastern Bloc, which relied on a stagnant form of planned economy, experienced a decade-long period of stagflation and eventual collapse from which it did not recover, culminating with revolutions and the fall of communist regimes through Central and Eastern Europe and eventually in the Soviet Union. The process was accompanied by a gradual but important easing of restrictions on economic and political behavior in the late 1980s, including satellite states. The collapse in the USSR was characterized by an increase in the death rate, especially by men over 50, with alcoholism a major cause. There was also an increase in violent crime and murder. The Russian population peaked in the 1990s and is lower today than 2 decades ago. Russian financial crisis of 1988. After more or less stabilizing after the disintegration of the USSR, a severe financial crisis took place in the Russian Federation in August 1998. It was caused by low oil prices and government expenditure cuts after the end of the Cold War. Other nations of the former Soviet Union also experienced economic collapse, although a number of these crises also involved armed conflicts, like in the breakaway region Chechnya. The default by Russia on its government bonds in 1998 led to the collapse of the highly leveraged hedge fund long-term capital management, which threatened the world's financial system. There's also the Argentina economic crisis of 1999 to 2002, and even Latvia, where the GDP has declined more than 20% since 2008, one of the worst recessions on record. But what most of us are concerned about is the United States economy. Is there an economic collapse coming to the U.S.? Many people wonder what the uncertain future holds for the global economy. Over the last few years, economists have been expressing increasing concerns about the direction of the global economy and the possibility of a worldwide depression. They warn about the growing imbalances in the world economy and the potential consequences if it isn't fixed. Barack Obama and the chairman of the Fed, Ben Bernanke, keep repeating the phrase economic recovery over and over. This is confusing for most Americans because things don't look any better where they live. There are millions of Americans sitting at home right now wondering why they lost their jobs and why no one will hire them. Millions of others are wondering why the only jobs they can get are the jobs a high school student can do. Families across America are wondering why it seems that their wages never go up, but the price of gas and the price of food continues to skyrocket. We're facing some serious long-term economic problems in this country, and we need to educate the American people about why the collapse of the economy is happening. If Americans don't understand why they're losing their jobs and homes and why they're drowning in debt, then they're going to keep doing all the same things they have been doing. There are some fundamental things about the economy that every American should know. Americans need to get up off the couch and begin to understand what's really going on and what needs to be done to solve our economic problems. If Americans don't wake up in time, the potential collapse that's coming could tear this nation to shreds.